Okay, so first of all, I would like to apologize for the fact that I'm only present in the form of a YouTube link. But unfortunately, I'm working right now, basically due to the COVID-19 situation. However, hope you will enjoy the presentation still, and if there are any questions left, we can maybe move them to the virtual tea room afterwards, which I'm really looking forward to. My presentation is called the UKIP and their Brexit campaign on Facebook, a multimodal critical discourse analysis of the official UKIP Facebook site during the Brexit campaign. And first of all, one needs to say that the internet as we know it today is actually based upon certain technological developments, such as the invention of the MP3, or the real player, or the flash player in 1996. And it's only through these technological inventions, a text-based system as it was originally, moved into the version of the internet as we know it nowadays. And it's not without a reason that, in particular between 2003 and 2006, there was a great expansion of social networking sites, like for instance MySpace, Flickr, Facebook, or YouTube, which is basically due to the fact that suddenly there was the ability to upload audio and videos, for instance. So social networking sites are basically platforms which are built up on Web 2.0 technology. And obviously these social networking sites have had a great impact upon our language behavior and on how we communicate. The biggest of them obviously being Facebook, with 1.82 billion daily users and 2.74 billion monthly users. These are the numbers from 2020. In particular, for political discourse, social networking sites have had a great influence, as it has changed the context drastically. For instance, politicians are no longer dependent or no longer dependent on information gatekeepers, which are basically institutions or organizations or people who are deciding which piece of information is valid for the public and which is not, for instance, newspapers or TV news. So because of social networking sites, politicians have the ability to upload whatever, whenever, wherever they want to. And thereby they have the opportunity to reach out to people who would otherwise be less interested in politics. And this is something politicians are getting increasingly aware of. And therefore there is this necessity in investigating the persuasive potential of political social media discourse. And again, therefore, the analysis of opinion-leading social networking sites, such as, for instance, the UKIP Facebook site during the Brexit referendum, needs to be considered of great importance, in particular for socially oriented approaches such as CDA. The research questions I will focus upon in these presentations are, first of all, which rhetorical strategies did the UKIP primarily use on Facebook during the Brexit referendum to create a certain image of themselves and the European Union? Then, how did the visual and the verbal modes create the comprehensive, persuasive political overall pictures? And in how far were rhetorical strategies adopted by the followers in the commentary section? The methodological framework I'm working with, first of all, I do use CMDA, computer-mediated discourse analysis, or techniques taken from there for the sampling of data, and I would like to particularly mention NetVis, an extraction program which can be used in order to download the entire discourse taking place at a certain site during a certain period of time. For the qualitative analysis of the data, I'm using DHA, and for the analysis of multimodal text, I'm using a multimodal critical discourse analysis. Very briefly, coming to the discourse historical approach, it is a variation of critical discourse analysis, and thereby its major aim is to decode manipulation and the exercise of powers in discourse. However, what is specific of DHA is the fact that it has a very profound understanding of context, and it distinguishes between 4 different layers or levels of context. However, these context levels, I do consider them rather being dimensions, which is why also the reason why I do not move systematically from one level to the next in my analysis, but rather invoke the respective dimension, when the analysis calls for that. However, what I'm very much sticking to and referring to are the 5 discourse strategies from DHA, which are first of all nominations, with the question of how a person's objects or phenomena are referred to, predication, what characteristics are attributed, argumentation, which arguments are being used in the discourse, perspectivation, from what perspectives are these nominations, attributions, and arguments being defined, and finally mitigation and intensification, which is basically the question how utterances are being intensified or mitigated. However, in my analysis, I do focus upon the nomination, predication, and argumentation. Then for the analysis of multimodal text, I do use a socio-semiotic approach, which is by Crescent van Leuven, which is basically their attempt to translate systemic functional linguistics to the analysis of non-linguistic modes. And according to Crescent van Leuven, all language is shaped in relation to 3 general metafunctions. So first of all, there is the representational or ideational metafunction, which deals with how people and objects are being represented in discourse. Then interactive or interpersonal metafunction, which is basically the question of the relation between the producer and the receiver. And finally, compositional or textual metafunctions, which are dealing with the cohesion and connectivity of different textual elements into a comprehensive meaning. The data set I am analyzing in this presentation, or I'm going to present, is, well, basically I'm dealing with the discourse taking place on the official UKIP Facebook site between the 1st of May 2016 and the 30th of June 2016. And during this period of time, the UKIP posted a total number of 137 posts, out of which 3 was only text-based. I do not include any hyperlinks in my analysis. I obviously know that the inclusion of hyperlinks into the analysis would be very interesting, both in particular for matters of intertextuality and recontextualization. However, a profound analysis of the thereby accumulated data would go beyond the scope of this presentation. Still, I would like to mention that by omitting hyperlinks and reposts from third websites, I do to a certain extent miss out major features of social networking sites, which is the inclusion of external data. However, I'm making one exception, which are shares from Nigel Farage's Facebook site. First of all, because he is defined as the face of the Leave campaign, and moreover also because it seems almost to be, or it was quite obvious that it was a strategy of the UKIP to share his posts permanently. Yeah. Now I would like to briefly mention central findings before I go into detail of them. So what is obviously is that the UKIP was able to create an us versus them dichotomy via different rhetorical strategies. They were creating a positive self and negative image, negative other presentation, and in particular one should mention their striking use of pronouns, metaphors, their color schematic strategies, and their compositional and spatial organization. Moreover, there is a great focus upon Nigel Farage, who is defined as the Vox Populi and contrasted to the so-called detached elite. We'll come to that later on as well. Furthermore, when it comes to argumentation, there is they are really focusing on the topics of danger and threats and of history. So first of all, very briefly coming to the pronominal system. The UKIP, they were using a very coherent pronominal system on their Facebook appearance during that period of time, and they're doing so in order to arouse solidarity and emotional closeness. For instance, there is the constant repetition of the first-person plural pronoun, of the inclusive first-person plural pronoun, by which they are highlighting institutional solidarity and again creating this impression of the us versus them dichotomy. Moreover, they use the inclusive we form very often in combination with have, need, or must, again by which they create this collective involvement and responsibility. For instance, in the first example, it says, we must break free of the European Union. Moreover, they are frequently using the second person singular possessive pronoun and combine it with imperatives or factive verbs. for instance, as an example number 3. The use of these imperatives is basically can be understood as a direct request to the audience, and by which a certain emotional bond is created between the speaker, the UKIP itself, and the audience. Well, this is something which also becomes very obvious in the commentary section. So the same pronominal system is adapted in the commentary section as well. I would like to mention at this point that in my PhD project I'm intending to base the evaluation of the commentary section on quantitative data. However, this has not yet happened yet. So the data from the commentary section which I'm presenting today is basically, well, that's really qualitative analysis rather than quantitative. Moreover, when it comes to the use of metaphors and metonymy, it becomes obvious that they are having a very frequent use of ontological metaphors, meaning they compare abstract concepts to concrete substances. As for instance in example number 1, where they say the European Union is at the breaking point, by which they compare the European Union to a brittle object. Moreover, they constantly use personification, meaning something non-human is turned into something human. For instance, as in example number 2, where it says the European Union has failed us all, meaning the European Union is compared to a person who's failed another person, namely the UK. Moreover, the flags are used as a metonymy of the nation. The Union Jack is usually represented as a symbol for democracy, control, and patriotism, and contrasted directly, as in this case, to the European Union flag that stands for the unification of the European nations. And again, the same metaphors, metonymy and also personification, can be seen in the commentary section. For instance, in example number 1, we see the example, the EU is at the breaking point again, the European Union is compared to a brittle object. Or in number 3, the European Union does not work. So this example, the European Union is being compared to a machine, basically. And an example which I consider being very interesting is the last one, number 6, where it says, "My heart beats for Great Britain, the Union Jack," where actually the flag is being mentioned directly in the commentary section as well. Now, I already mentioned in the short overview that the UKIP had a very coherent color schematic strategy, and this becomes obvious throughout actually their Facebook appearance. What I'm actually referring to is, first of all, the general color system they are using, and also the font colors. So nitroforage is usually shown in combination to the UKIP's party color, and that's not that surprising. But what is more striking is that David Cameron is permanently portrayed in front of a black or grey background, which is interesting insofar as that is not the traditional Tory colours. They are blue. This visual strategy is emphasized with the use of red font in the add-on, and that is something which we can see throughout the Facebook appearance of the UKIP. So they use red font in the add-ons when they are trying to or aiming to create negative sentiments towards the European Union. Now, as a next step, I would like to show you a short cut together of videos which were posted on the Facebook site of the UKIP during that period of time.
Our leaders don't believe in the country. You know, and we can run our own country, and we can control our own borders. Oh, right, the day's getting better. Hello there, how are we? All right. Good to see you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're calling time on Britain's membership of the European Union. Let's meet the public. Let's convince everybody who in their hearts and minds knows now they've got to get out there next Thursday and do it.
I actually want to thank you for what you've done.
Thank you.
You have stood up and said Britain needs to be where it is.
They think we're too small, too weak, too worn down. They've lost faith in their country. and they've lost faith in their own ability to make a success of it.
A European bureaucracy totally unaccountable to anybody. These are quite serious matters.
They think we're better off letting other people make our decisions for us.
The European Union and Britain is one thing. The United Kingdom belongs to the European Union.
They are wrong.
Okay. So what we see very clearly is that Nigel Farage is permanently represented as the Vox Populi. He is put into contrast to the detached elite. He is filmed demonstrating humor. He's always among the crowd, in the middle of the crowd, always either outside or in public places such as the pub. And it almost appears that he is leading a certain grassroots movement or something like that. What is also interesting and striking is that he does not talk on a factual level, really, but he basically elaborates the same us versus them distinctions, which is already done in the slogans, and he's using the same linguistic techniques which we already were discussing before that. And at this point, I would also like to mention the very ambivalent relationship the UKIP has to xenophobia, as they were actually frequently accused of being racist and almost ideologically close to the BNP, the British National Party, even though they themselves always emphasized that this is not the case. However, therefore, I think it's particularly striking that Nigel Farage is permanently portraying and putting himself in front of different ethnic minority groups, while he, at the same time, is emphasizing in his argumentation that there is this great danger of immigration while using the topos of threats. Also, it is interesting that in the commentary section we see that Nigel Farage is being understood as the man of the people. For instance, as an example number 1, it says, "Well done, Nigel, come on, folks, let's rally and show everyone what UKIP is all about." And what is striking is that they are referring to Nigel Farage via his first name, which is something very unusual in Great Britain otherwise, with the exception of Boris Johnson, where the same thing actually takes place. Now, when it comes to the detached elite, they are basically, Juncker, Schulz, Cameron, Merkel, they are basically permanently being portrayed as voiceless participants. And they are only shown in negative, in the form of negative content when criticism towards the European Union is being expressed by the voiceover spoken by Nigel Farage himself. Simultaneously, there is this permanent, dramatic, non-diegetic sound. And what is very striking is, again, very much in contrast to Nigel Farage, they are permanently being placed indoors, totally disconnected from the public, not even looking to the eyes really, only passing by permanently. That is very interesting and striking in comparison to how Nigel Farage is being portrayed. The idea of the detached elite is something which we also recognize in the commentary section of the UKIP Facebook site during that period of time, as we, for instance, can see in example number 1, where it says, "They are not for the people, but only for the rich." Now I would like to come to how the topos of danger and threat is permanently being used in particular or presented particular in visuals. And what is striking, should be said before that, is that opinions polls actually revealed that there were 2 major arguments for EU skepticism in the UK. On the one hand, there is the fear of losing cultural and national sovereignty, and on the other hand, the fear of immigration. And both of these factors actually represents the desire of people to take back control and not being represented by a supranational organization as the European Union is one. So the topos of danger and threat and of history is being used as quasi-rational emotional arguments by which the exclusion of the others is being legitimated. I'm very much aware of that there is a debate going on in how far argumentation can actually be represented in visuals. And I will not go into detail here, but just to say that much, according to my opinion, there is at least something called multimodal argumentation. This image in particular depicts the metaphor immigration is a natural disaster. We see a stream of people that is metaphorically being compared to a natural force breaking into the country. The faces of the people are totally being denied, they are anonymized thereby, and rather being presented as generic types. The topos of threats is again emphasized with the red font in the add-on. And this image in particular is actually has a very infamous background, as it was originally authorized by Nigel Farage, who was pretending that this image was taken at the British border, even though it was actually taken at the Croatian-Slovenian border. The topos of danger and threat is something which we can also see in the commentary section. For instance, in example number 1, they are using, and also the use of the metaphor immigration is a natural disaster. For instance, in number 1, it says, our country is already sinking, floods where they never had floods before. Or as in example number 3, this is not immigration, it is a catastrophe, and it has to be controlled. Now, I would also like to briefly discuss the topos of history that is basically used by the UKIP and their videos in order to promote this concept of Britishness and shared cultural and historical memory. So the depiction of these images of Britishness are only being interrupted by the insertion of the faces of the others, of, for instance, Cameron, which are shown in a contrastive way to these metonymical representations of the UK. This contrast is again emphasized by the sound being turned off from off-screen to on-screen, and again thereby the impression is emphasized that that these politicians, these other politicians, these opposing politicians, actually they are the faces of the Remain campaign, which stand in total contrast to the concept of Britishness. For instance, here in number 1 we see the Olympic rings, we see a TV sequence of the Falkland Wars, which many British people still consider as a military triumph, where Britain was able to prove everlasting strength, but also national symbols like, for instance, Stonehenge. And while these images are being shown, they are accompanied by a voiceover spoken by Nigel Farage, who is thereby actually metonymically representing the Leave campaign and is defined as the savior of Britishness and is the contrast of these faces which are defining the Remain campaign. Coming to a conclusion, this presentation was basically a very brief multimodal discourse historical analysis of the Facebook rhetoric of the UKIP during the Brexit, with a focus on nomination, predication and argumentation. What is interesting and striking is the fact that there is rarely any factual information at all, but that it basically only tries to appeal to emotions. Thereby it is a prototypical example for a digital post-truth era campaign. Moreover, there is the constant construction of dichotomous in and out groups via both visual and verbal modes. In multimodal, there is multimodal argumentation taking place, and in particular, they are depicting the topos of threat, danger, or of history. And what is also striking is that in the commentary sections, the rhetorical strategies and the structures which are being presented by the UKIP in the post are actually being adopted very clearly. For instance, the use of the first person plural pronoun, a very similar use of metaphors and metonymy and personification, and also the same arguments basically. I would like to say thank you for your attention, and as already mentioned, if there are any more questions left, I'm really looking forward to discuss them in the tea room.